welcome to the show. So I'm going to hijack my own presentation a little bit. Whom from you guys is from Europe? Okay. So the rest is American. And for you guys, it's interesting what's going on actually in Europe because we had a tremendous increase of regulations. And those regulations are also imposed on companies that do business on the European market. So it's not only a European company that is subject to this legislation, it's also any company that places a product on the European market. So that's the term. So that's basically the agenda. So I'm going to talk a lot about EU regulations and onboard you a little bit on what's out there, and then a little bit about the roadmap of our certification. So my name is Knut Repte. I'm the product manager for everything, for product security for everything that's called somehow SUSE Linux Enterprise. Yeah, and that includes certifications, security features, and government affairs. So EU regulations. Even before 2022. The US has been the highest regulated IT market on the planet. The EU simply changed that now a little bit. And a little bit is, well, if they do something, they do something. So, first of all, let me explain a little bit about European legislation. The European Community is a union of sovereign nation states which have their own laws, and this creates some momentum and some complexity on the EU legislation. There's different versions of it. First of all, there are the regulations. These regulations, mostly called acts, are direct. So they are imposed directly. Then you have directives, and directives need to be implemented. It's basically the EU ordering the nation state to implement certain legislation into their legislation. This makes, for example, sense because all the nations have different structures in the legislation. Yeah, so Germany's structure very much differs from the structure of Greece or Italy, and some of those legislations are going very, very deep into the details, so that existing legislation needs to be changed and harmonized. So, these normally, so the EU orders that have to be implemented, and if it's not done, the EU can impose penalties on the nation states. They're not cheap. I think the last time Germany got penalty, it was something like 50 million. So, but the problem with some of the legislation is that is not implemented yet in some nation states. But there has been court ruling, which says basically it could be used, although directly then, if it's detailed enough in order to be used for the case. So, and the other things, decisions, recommendations, opinions, it's basically much lighter, and they're not imposing directly any force. So, which legislation am I talking about? So, one is relatively severe. That's called the SUSE legislation. It's basically about infrastructure. Then we have the digital Operational Resilience Act, that is targeting especially the financial sector. And we have the Critical Entities Resilience Act, CR, which is targeting also critical infrastructure, but the physical side. So the first one, the NIS2, is about cybersecurity. The other one is about physical security. And in CR, for example, also entitles companies of a certain kind then to do background scans of the personnel, which normally they're not allowed to do so, right? And then there's the AI Act, last but not least, and a lot smaller ones. And you have to understand there is something that is called the new European legislation method. And it's basically a tricolon. You first have an implementing act, then you have another act that might be, no, first you have a basic act, and then you got an implementing act, and then there are norms. Norms could be created mostly also by industry, by getting together with in DIN ISO or in Senelec. They're very important in order to define what is state of the art. And so since these changes are happening, there's also a lot of activity on the norm sector. And yeah, hopefully that's not making things wilder, because especially aircraft industry always comes with their specialties. Of course, in Germany, the automobile industry is super strong, and they want their own standards. And sorry, some of the standards, for example, they wrote, you can clearly see that they have been written by mechanical engineers who simply copied norms for hardware, which then doesn't make sense on software. So that's crazy. So, and now let's see how that works a little bit together. So NIS2 entities, all DORA entities are automatically NIS2 entities. Yeah. And DORA is highly specific for the finance sector. It sort of means risk analysis on the cyberspace with overall risks. So when there's risk analysts ask for risk analysis, it has to be targeting the perspective of the, for example, bank customer. What's his risk in this? And this could even span over several organizations in the supply chain. And so you can imagine if it has to be somehow orientated on the risk of the end customer, that there needs to be close collaboration between organizations in the future. So currently, there's a lot of hectic in Europe. A lot of lawyers are highly active inside the companies. A lot of consultancy companies goes around just to find out and break down the duties on the companies itself. Even in SUSE, we have several work streams which are led by lawyers in order to get us fit on the technical side, but on the legal side of things. Why is it so? It's because of digitization. What does digitization mean? We are freaking making things digital that hasn't been digital. Basically, we're connecting them to the internet. But what does that mean? We're creating a black hole. We're creating a black hole and bending time and space so that the bad guys are now next to your bedroom. Or they might be already in it, depending if the device might be in it. Absolutely. I was basically pointing the chief of the NIAP, which is a 30 years NSA agent, because the NIAP is a department of the NSA, to the fact that you can basically use any 5G antenna as a radar. Yeah. All you need to do is you need to re-render. So why is it so? Because these antennae do something that's called beamforming, which means they are calculating out of those array of antennas a virtual directed antenna which targets 1,000 times a second different devices everywhere, and calculates something like a virtual beam into that direction, measuring the physical environment in order to compensate. But if you take that physical environment compensation and map it 3D, you got you got basically a 3D radar out of everything. So if the Russians want to invade Germany, they might just call Huawei and ask for access to the 5G stations, and they have a wonderful view. So over-the-top radar is not now necessary anymore. Sorry for the joke. Because you could basically directly even see through buildings. That's crazy, isn't it? And yeah, since the hardware is collecting the data anyway, and also processing the data, it has enough power to process the data. Well, I never did this. I'm not a hacker. And I will never do. So, but that's basically one of those threats out there. We can see in an analysis of the ENISA. The ENISA is a new European government entity. So she's on the level, it's on the level of superstate. It takes basically care about cybersecurity for the European community. It's also going to work out now the UCC scheme and other kinds of things, but they're also doing frequently reports. And I highly recommend you to take these reports and read them, or use them if you need to sensitify, I hope that's the word, any decision makers that it is a good idea now to do something. So those things on the left, and I'm sorry you can't read it because the beamers are so bad, is basically a lot of those attacks that are going on are nation-state action motivated somehow by advanced persistent threats. Interestingly, not only the United States, but also others came to the idea to outsource spy works, create a contractor scene around them, which is a bad idea because it sort of establishes know-how now in the economy. And let's say in times of peace and special organizations that would cut cost, maybe those guys look for new jobs. And so we also have something like a now very much professionalized scene of organized crime that is targeting organizations of any kind, mostly motivated by money, and it's a huge business. And me personally, I have high sorrows because the money that's now going there is creating something. It's not going somewhere. It's far too much that somebody just builds a big pool or anything like that. So it's going to be invested and it's going to be reused for attack. And the EU has seen that, predicted that, and said now it's time to react, because if we now digitize the entire life, the entire society, everything can be attacked via cyber attacks, and this very effectively. So we need to do something. And as we see by the numbers, the sheer numbers of, and I think it goes in the trillions of damage, it makes perfectly sense. So one particular thing that is really mean are supply chain attacks. A supply chain attacks basically uses your supplier to attack you. And we all know software isn't free of flaws. So we need security updates. And what if the bad stuff comes with a security update? That's really mean because you need it. So supply chain is very important. And in 2016, the NIAP did something very stupid from my perspective. They stepped out of common criteria certifications on the evaluation assurance level method into strict compliance against a NIAP protection profile. But why is that stupid in my eyes? Well, the problem is that these protection profile thing just look at the product itself, but not about the processes that are vulnerable in the supply chain. I come to this later. And yeah, the US has been target of severe attacks, mostly by a big company, which I will not mention, but anybody can guess. And this is a scandal. A company at the size of SUSE wouldn't survive one of it. Yeah. And it's a scandal that they do not take cybersecurity as serious as it is supposed to be. I mean, sorry, we're in the United States. You guys got nukes. I want you to be safe. We have, so now the NIS2. NIS2 is targeting the critical infrastructure sector. And I come to the critical infrastructure later. But I told you already that the implementation is due since the NIS2 is a directive. And the problem is that only the very green, so the dark green countries here have already fully implemented it. The light greens are about to, the yellows are discussing, and the red ones, like Germany, sorry, sorry for that. But the German government simply imploded last year, and so one legislation initiative that was already on the way was postponed, and now they need to start all over again, which means it will take a while. So, but when is a company subject to NIS2? Basically, if it belongs to one of those sectors, and it has more than 50 employees, and more than 10 million annual turnover. That's not very big. So even Spreewaldgurken, which basically sell cucumbers, are now doing this too, and they might not even know about it. So a lot of companies you find in the supermarket are now subject to this too, but I would say if you take a look at that, almost all our customers are subject to this too. And what's so crazy is and these customers, well, these companies are now supposed to find out whether they are subject to it, and if they are subject to it, they need to register at one of the national or multiple of the national authorities where you can register. In Germany, this will be probably the BSI. Elsewhere, it's going to be a long list. So this is by the BSI, something which they set up, how you identify to which group you belong to. Yeah, as you can see, it's a little complex. And here is my advice. Don't do it yourself. Hire a lawyer, because a lawyer got an insurance. If your company hires a lawyer, you're not insured. So by this legislation, there's a dramatic change. Cybersecurity requirements will now require compliance, meaning legal steps. So without the lawyer, you will not be able to fulfill it. And the penalties can go up to 15 million. That's harsh. And the interesting thing is, this is Article 21. The companies are basically now supposed to put into place Article 21, but Article 20 impose direct threat to the management body by saying they are now personally liable for their private money. So if you guys make a mistake and your CEO doesn't catch you on it, I didn't care, it's very likely that he's going to lose his house and his car and all of his possessions. There's not many CEOs out there who can pay 50 million out of a pocket. So this is harsh. And the interesting thing is, well, I was talking to a couple of C-levels, and they were pointing to D&O insurances, but I was also talking to the chief legal officer, former chief legal officer of the ENISA, and she told me, very smart woman, well, if somebody issues a fine, there is a violation of duty. And if there's a violation of duty, the insurance will not pay. So then you're on your own. And the interesting thing is, well, basically most of these letters there, and sorry you can't really read it, yeah, A to J, you can fulfill by a very good ISO 27000 certification and really get certified and make sure that it covers everything. Because NIS2 requires you to secure everything. There was, well, NIS2 indicates that there has been a NIS1, basically called NIS before, and the number of entities that had been subject to that were very much limited. And also, it was limited to the business of them that is basically called out in the NIS. Now, if a NIS2 entity is subject to NIS2, the entire company is subject to it. I was speaking to the Chief Information Security Officer of Vienna, and he basically told me before it was just the flight systems, flight control systems, but now it's also the shopping mall, which is subject to NIS2 because it's part of the organization. So that's interesting. And I told you, you can do it by an ISO 27001 or so, but there's one thing you cannot do by an ISO 27001, and that's basically letter D, supply chain. Well, I read the implementation regulation of that, and the annex, which details a little bit more how a part of those NIS2 entities shall implement it. That's very, very detailed, but there comes one problem up. A product manager like me would call it definition of done. So when has an organization done enough? And what if something's happening though? Can you basically give evidence that you did enough? Very critical point. And I told you, what's at stake? The house, the car, all the nice stuff, you know? So, if you evaluate your supply chain yourself, well, it ends up, from my perspective, in a chaos. If all the industry evaluates all the industry, you know? Just imagine a customer has now to evaluate all his suppliers, or a supplier is now evaluated by all its customers. If in terms of SUSE, that would mean we don't even have enough room to get all these auditors in. Yeah, we might need to be forced to rent off the football stadium of Munich or something like that. So it doesn't make sense. We don't even have enough personnel to get the job done. So from my perspective, that's the wrong way to do it. There's another way to do it, which I, as a German, very much like. There's a certification authority. In the best place, a state-based one, because the state is asking, the state should check at the end. A state authority should check the supply chain of a supplier. In our case, this has been done. It's called Common Criteria EAL4 Plus certification. By the way, the plus is unofficial. I had companies in the military sector coming in, why don't you have a plus? Yeah, I said the plus is not official. It's simply in the databases to indicate that there's more to the standard certification, meaning you can do an EAL4 certification, and EAL is for evaluation assurance level, which basically means how deep into the product development process and creation process are you looking when you're evaluating it. And 1 is just looking at the product itself. 7, basically the evaluate as part of the development team. And it's methodologically designed. So with an operating system, that's hard to do, especially when it's an open source operating system. So the maximum you can achieve there, realistically, is an EL4, which we have. But there's also this plus indicating there's more, yes, because there's an additional module we are taking. These modules are normally a group of 3 letters, then an underscore, another group of 3 letters, and then dot and a level. So we did ALC FLR3, which, yeah, common criteria is pretty old. It goes back to Orange Book and military standards, and they have their special terms. It's called flaw remediation, and this is just for security updates. So this is very important. And now, in order to put a little bit fire on the decision makers, I created the triathlon, or invented the triathlon of evaluation, just to make sure that they understand what's happening. They're now supposed to evaluate themselves. Hopefully they do so. But no matter they do or not do, or what they find or not, they're probably going to be evaluated by the bad guys. So they are going to find the flaws and the gaps just to get in and do their dirty work. On the other side, if they are successful, you'll probably end up in court. And that's at the last and least, and for sure you're going to be evaluated there. And that's not what you want. Why? Because if you get evaluated in court, something happened. So there was a flaw. And now you have to explain why it was there. Very bad position. There's something that could help, and that is a state-backed certification, where already a government officer has evaluated whether what you have done or your supplier has done is state-of-the-art. And if that is there, you're in a much better position. I'm not a lawyer, and our lawyers forbid me to tell you you're compliant with us, or we help you being compliant. Yeah, maybe. But you're in a much better position, because now the state itself has to explain why they haven't found it before. So that's basically the best you can get, and therefore a common criteria certification is good. And now this slide tells you why I think it was a bad idea of the NIAP to step out of the evaluation assurance level scheme, a way of certification. I know with the evaluation assurance level method, there is a little bit of leeway. And regularly, normally, the leeway is used to update the required and evaluated security measures to the state of the art, because such a protection profile is updated maybe every 2 or 3 years, and in between there might be relevant changes which you can check them. But with an EL4 you can. I don't know who or why. But basically I asked several times, and every time the answer was, we want specifications. We want to check against specifications. There might be a speculation why it helps in court or justifies stuff, but the problem is it just looks at the product. And since it is necessary to have a common criteria NIAP certification in order to sell to the US federal government, most vendors out there do this. And then they stop there because it said, well, it's a common criteria certification. But the old evaluation assurance level model looks into more, and now it becomes significant, because most of that they are looking to is significant for the security of the software supply chain. Meaning that if a company like SUSE has a common criteria L4 certification, almost all of what is relevant for the security of the supply chain has already been evaluated. So if you end up in court, you can point to this evidence and to this fact. If you don't have it, you can point to nothing or yourself. And that's a bad thing to do from my perspective, but your companies can decide on their own. So, common criteria is a norm that is established by ISO 15408 how to do a cybersecurity evaluation. and certification. And what, so it's basically these how, but then it needs to be done, and therefore there need to be certification authorities, and there are now 2 full-size international treaties that rule on the mutual recognition of those results. So basically, we did the NIAP protection profile common criteria certification with the German BSI, but since there's a contract, the common criteria recognition agreement, it's fully recognized by the American NIAP, and therefore we are on the product compliance list in the United States. And don't be afraid, those certification authorities are voluntarily checking each other frequently. And basically, frequently the BSI asks us if our certification can be used as a for this revalidation process of the certification authority, so the BSI. And the certification authority is the BSI itself, but it's done basically by one department of the BSI. And with these voluntarily checks, they basically demonstrate all the other certification authorities that they are by the books. And so, and I'm very pleased that they ask us, because this gives additional assurance because then now our certification has not only been checked by the BSI, but also by the other authorities a little bit. So that's very valuable. And then we have another treaty out there that's a pan-European one. And that's the so-called SUSE MRA treaty. And the SUSE MRA treaty is now also directly mentioned in the new legislation. Why? Because the EU has also established a new common criteria scheme, pan-European wise, which will replace national schemes now with a period of handover. Some people had been afraid that they might step out of the common criteria recognition agreement. I don't know. I don't think they will. And just in a little more than a week now, I'm going to be in Europe, in Brussels, talking to the officials of the common criteria certification community. And I will very much make clear that we don't want this as vendors, because we don't want to do hundreds of these certifications, right? And which are basically checking the same thing. From my perspective, that's a waste of money, which is better used in hiring engineers fixing stuff. So, but the SUSE MRA has one advantage, because the NIAP has cut off the official recognition of the evaluation assurance levels on the international way to level 2. It before 2016 was 4, they cut it down to 2. So basically, and they also said that they are not going to do an evaluation assurance level based evaluation basically on operating systems ever again. Meaning, at the NIAP you cannot do a common criteria EL4 certification for a product. But for Europe, it fully helps, because the EL4 is fully recognized. It's officially recognized. So the national certifications body must recognize and value this certification as if it is one of theirs, and also that has impact on any court in any of these countries. So, interestingly, ALC-FLR3 is still recognized. So, in terms of a common criteria EL4 certification of SUSE products, it means for the legal situation in the United States, for example, we are officially, we have been evaluated to level 4, which is officially recognized just to level 2, but the evaluation has taken place by an honorable state authority. And interestingly, the ALC-FLR3 is also evaluated. And why is the ALC-FLR3 so important? Because this is about security updates. And the new legislation, for example, in Europe now commands that there are security updates. And also it basically means, yeah, that this moment in time that has been evaluated product shall be updated by all these security updates that are following. So that this is basically a normal way also in the United States. And for SUSE it means, and for you as our customers, you've got a product with SUSE Linux Enterprise Server that has 2 full-size common criteria certifications behind it. So it's a NIAP, and then additionally DL4. Yes, we could use a tiny portion of it again as evidence in the new certification process, since we are doing it in the same authority, but it means you get 2 of them. And you can think by yourself value, but if your organization now has products or places products on the European market, and it's in one of those sectors, you're subject to NIS2 legislation, and you might have, and your CEO is personally liable for the security of the software supply chain. Well, which in our case has been evaluated. Just one thing, military is excluded. They are not subject to NIS2. So, but what is the supply chain in our case? Well, it's basically the whole process from, since we are an open source company, the community code, which we call upstream, towards the very binaries on the servers, and how you identify that these binaries are the binaries that has been checked and coming from us. But this is done via certificates and checksums, which guarantee, if you execute on them the checks, that this is the very software we compiled, right? This is even part of the installer, which checks these binaries whether they are compliant. So this is then why we do this security certification. So, I mean, you all heard that we are there for a very long time. We're basically making enterprise Linux now for 25 years. And what does that mean? Enterprise ready? Well, it means a lot, but also one means an enterprise is an organization where the leader has to justify his decisions. And so he needs evidence that he did his job. And in order to do so, he needs certifications, and best state-backed certifications. And that's why SUSE is always trying to do state-backed certifications. Common criteria is not the only thing we do. For North America, we're also doing the FIPS 140-3 certifications. Oh boy, this is a pain, because the NIST, who is the certification authority, has a huge backlog. It takes us, well, we're handing it in, and then we're waiting for ages for them to work on it. That's, I can't change it. Even customers from us have been complaining directly to the NIST, much bigger corporations than we do. At the end, even I think army generals were complaining, but even they couldn't change the situation. Well, that's basically it. I also want to say something about how good is basically our build service. For a long time, there had not been really any standard to measure the completeness of actions and effectiveness. But Google came up then with SLSA, SLSA, and they came up with a draft of their standard. And my manager came to me and asked me, hey Knut, what about this Google initiative? Let's check. So I basically took the documentation and threw it into the build service team. They analyzed it, and they said, oh, pretty good standard. yeah, some minor changes here and there, and we're compliant. And I said, okay, cool, execute. So I think it was just a couple of weeks, 2 or 3, and we were SUSE compliant, and this on the highest level there, level 4. And in this version, the draft version, there was a level 4. And basically, all others, I think the maximum, the competitor, which I will not say into the mic, that is recorded, is the name, but it's, they were just on level 3. And then something crazy happened. Then we wrote a blog article, because you cannot be really certified against it. So, but we want to communicate that we are compliant, and we very detailed did so. We basically wrote a long article explaining why we think we are SUSE level 4 compliant. Then a lot of activity was there, which I cannot tell. But then the final standard was coming out, and oops, level 4 was missing. So we still say, unofficially, we are on level 4, whilst the actual version of the standard doesn't have a level 4. But there's going to be an update, and we're constantly monitoring the updates of SUSE and implementing whatever's done. And one of those steps will be that with SLE 16, we are aiming to have reproducible builds. What does it mean? Normally, if you send binaries into a build service, each time you do so, you get different binaries at the other end. That's simply because you cannot determine which of those, because it's parallelized, and you cannot determine which package is compiled first and stuff, and then it differs on the binaries, because maybe inside binaries, things, the position changed of stuff, or things like timestamps are changing, and then it's not really binary identical. But reproducible builds now means we're altering our build service so that we can predetermine that each time we run, we get this very same binary, so you can do a binary comparison of the result and compile yourself. And actually, you think that's over the top? Well, till 2022, the Russians did exactly that with our code in the FS Tech certification. And of course, after 2022, we discontinued collaboration with them, and before there was some things going on which were a little bit strange for us, but they couldn't find anything. And that's, from my perspective, something that says about the quality of what we do. So we cover with our certifications vast parts of the globe. This is basically a map which tells you what we have. I kept FS Tech for Russia still in, because some of the certificates are still valid. And I think the city of Moscow is still using us. Don't know. We do certifications, proprietary certifications also in China. And that's basically the coverage we have. And so if your companies are operating in, basically they can rely on these kinds of certifications. So now I'm coming to the roadmap part, but before I get there, are there questions? PCI DSS? Yeah, PCI DSS is a standard, and it's for credit card information. And basically, it's not the due of us to get certified, but of the final product while operating on the credit card information. But what we are providing is guidance on how to get our products PCI compliant. And those are frequently updated. So I cannot say it's a certification. It's simply we provide tooling that our customers can do a valuable certification. yeah, it's a step-by-step guide. Just Google SUSE PCI, and you'll find it. So this is the certification roadmap of things we've done. The columns are Common Criteria EL4, and then with CC Recert, we also mean, basically a recertification of the NIAP scheme, the NIAP version of it, and then we have FIPS 140-3. So this is the most important, and therefore we did with the 15 a TikTok scheme. So every odd service pack, there was a new kernel, and since there was a new kernel, there was a necessity to do a recertification for FIPS, because the kernel is a FIPS module, and so we start to say, okay, every 2 years we're basically doing this recertification tour. It's pretty long. It takes us 2 to 3 years to get it completed. It's a hell of a work, and we are currently planning to do SP6, but also SP7. I'm not 100% sure about the scope yet, so therefore I haven't placed there. Why? We are a little bit in trouble with FIPS for SLE 15. There's a deprecation. There's a deprecation of a standard called SHA-1. So SHA-1 cannot be FIPS compliant anymore beyond 2030, meaning that we will be not able to do FIPS certifications again. Why? Because if we would eliminate SHA-1 out of SLE 15, the behavior of it would change so much that we would create something like a SLE 16 or let's say 15 and a half. So it wouldn't really be a SLE 15, and the user, or let's say the interface of the applications towards the operating system would change that much that it couldn't be called a SLE 15 anymore. So sorry for that. There will not be any FIPS compliance beyond 2030. So for this code stream, so please consider migration and update to SLE 16 then. SLE 16, we are planning basically the same thing. Why am I a bit vague here? We're still a little bit contemplating on, well, how we are going to do the support scheme, and we want to synchronize the support scheme, especially with TSS, with the certification activities, so there's still harmonization internally in our organization going on right now, so please, I'm a little vague, it's a little vague, but you'll get the information pretty much soon as we have finished the details. Then there's SLE Micro. SLE Micro will not any longer be a standalone product, so it will be phased into SLE 16, but it's gonna get a flavor on how a SLE 16 is installed. So it's we will see it as an installation variant of it. So basically, and we will keep treating it the same thing. Okay. Just some short updates about the ongoing projects. I'm sorry, I'm going over the top. Projects for SP4 are all completed and certified. For SP6, we're ongoing. You can see the ETAs. We hopefully have finished the FIPS certification by somewhere beginning 2027 with all the modules. And then we have the NIAP protection profile certification for SLE 15 and SP4 is completed. We're also already on the product compliance list. The virtual protection profile thing is still going on, I'm sorry, and the EL4 certification also, hopefully that's going to be completed this at the end of the year. We canceled the VPP and EL4 for SLE Micro, but the NIAP certification, I think, is close to be, well, is it already completed? I think I'm wrong. I have to check, sorry. So that's it. Thank you very much. If you have got questions, you're not so many people, just follow me outside and throw everything on me. Sorry, Ulrike.